You know what costs $1,200 a month in most of America? A one-bedroom apartment where you can hear your neighbor's entire life through the walls. But in certain corners of U.S. territory, places that technically fly the same flag, but operate under completely different rules, that number drops to $25, sometimes $0. And no, we're not talking about Section 8 waiting lists or your cousin's moldy basement. We're talking about actual legal frameworks where the concept of paying rent to a landlord just doesn't exist the way it does on the mainland. These aren't loopholes. They're entire systems, some protected by indigenous land laws that go back over a century, others created by governments so desperate for warm bodies they'll literally pay you to show up. There are U.S. islands where land can't be sold to outsiders at any price, rural towns handing out free residential lots like promotional keychains, and Caribbean communities where your monthly housing payment is 3 hours of farm work and a willingness to learn how to harvest breadfruit. Here are 12 U.S. territories and regions where people are living almost rent-free right now, and the specific mechanisms that make it possible. American Samoa doesn't do landlords. 90% of the land in this Pacific territory is communal, managed under a system called Fa'a Samoa, the Samoan way. It's overseen by Matai, family chiefs who act as trustees for the Aiga, which is basically your extended family or clan. If you're part of that family, or if you've been integrated into the community through long-term association, housing isn't a commodity you rent. It's a family resource you share. The Manua Islands, Tau, Ofu, Olasega, are where this system is still the dominant reality. You don't write a check to a landlord. You contribute to the family's collective needs and follow the decisions of the Fono, the village council. The legal framework protecting this goes back to the Deeds of Cession from 1900 and 1904, which explicitly prevent these lands from being sold to non-Samoans. That's why you don't see the kind of speculative real estate inflation that's eating the mainland alive. But here's the catch. The Manua Islands are 60 miles from the main island of Tutuila by boat or plane. The ferry costs $30 one way and runs every 2 weeks. Flights are $155 and up 3 times a week. 90% of medical supplies, food, and building materials come through the port in Pago Pago, then have to make that secondary journey. If you need serious health care, you're taking that 60-mile trip to a hospital with 124 beds serving over 50,000 people. So yeah, rent is $0, but isolation is the currency you're paying in. The Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands runs one of the last active homesteading programs under the U.S. flag. It's managed by the Department of Public Lands, and it's designed specifically for people who can't afford to buy land on the private market. If you're of Northern Mariana's descent, at least 18, and a registered voter in the Northern Islands, you can get village or agricultural land for the cost of filing fees. Rota and Tinian are where this is happening. You get a permit, you clear the land, you build a home that meets local safety codes. Once you've proven actual occupancy, the permit converts to a quitclaim deed. The government announced in 2025 they're adding roadways, housing loans, and utility infrastructure to these new homestead villages to make settlement easier. The trade-off is strict enforcement. If you don't build or occupy the land, they revoke the permit, and you have to be of indigenous descent or deeply tied to the community. The covenant that established the CNMI's political union with the U.S. allows for local control over land alienation, specifically to protect the Chamorro and Carolinian populations from being priced out by outsiders. This isn't a program for mainlanders looking for a beach retirement. It's for people who already belong. Water Island sits in the Charlotte Amalie Harbor of St. Thomas, smallest of the 4 main U.S. Virgin Islands. It doesn't have a central town or traditional marinas, which makes it perfect for the liveaboard lifestyle. People who live full-time on sailboats. In the USVI, any vessel can anchor in a bay for 14 cumulative days within a 6-month period without a permit. For longer stays, you get long-term anchoring permits through the Department of Planning and Natural Resources. You're replacing a $1,000 apartment with permit fees and the labor of maintaining your boat. The economics shifted recently. The British Virgin Islands raised annual fees for foreign-based charter vessels from $200 to as high as $24,000 in 2025. That caused a contraction in the transient charter market, which opened up more space for long-term liveaboards in USVI anchorages like Honeymoon Bay. Public moorings for day use are free for vessels under 60 feet. National Park moorings in St. John or St. Croix run $26 a night. VIPA overnight moorings are $35 for up to 14 nights. Compare that to mainland rent, and it's not even close. The price you pay is weather exposure, the physical work of boat maintenance, and limited services on Water Island itself. But for people who already know how to live on the water, it's a functional way to stay in U.S. territory without feeding the traditional rental machine. In the mountainous interior of Puerto Rico, there are communities like Plenitude PR in Las Marias, where housing and food are provided in exchange for 3 to 5 hours of labor per day. These are permaculture farms running internships and apprenticeships, and the housing they're building uses super adobe, earth-filled bags that create structures resistant to hurricanes and thermally efficient in the tropical heat. The model focuses on rainwater harvesting and solar energy, which means you're bypassing the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority grid entirely. That's significant because PREPA's rates are high and the reliability is inconsistent. You're not a tenant, you're an apprentice. You work the educational farm, you help with community outreach, and in return you get a place to sleep and food to eat. It's a direct conversion of time into housing equity. For people not formally in an apprenticeship, the cost of living in these rural mountain towns, Adjuntas, Utuado, Las Marias, is still significantly lower than in the San Juan metro area. The catch is physical labor in a rural environment. You're far from city amenities, you're working with your hands, and you're committing to a lifestyle built around sustainability rather than convenience. There's a widespread but largely undocumented method of rent-free living in the Caribbean territories that involves taking care of someone else's property. Because of high outmigration rates and the prevalence of second homes owned by mainlanders, many properties sit vacant for most of the year. That creates demand for on-site security and maintenance. Under Puerto Rican law, the concept of usufruct allows you to use and enjoy a property owned by someone else as long as you maintain its condition. Caretaker agreements formalize this. The arrangement usually states that no landlord-tenant relationship exists. Instead, it's an employer-employee relationship where you're being paid through the provision of housing. You find these opportunities through local networks or by researching the Registro de la Propiedad to identify owners of neglected estates. Municipalities sometimes designate properties as public nuisances, which can create legal pathways for individuals to take over. Maintenance in exchange for residency. The duration is usually a specified term or until the property sells. Your responsibilities are security, light repairs, and landscaping. Compensation is free housing, sometimes with a small salary on top. Termination is often 30 days notice. It's not permanent, but it's a real way to live rent-free in the USVI or Puerto Rico if you're willing to do the work and accept the lack of long-term stability. Kansas has designated 73 counties as rural opportunity zones, and the incentive is straightforward. New residents who move to these counties can receive up to $15,000 in student loan repayments over 5 years. That's effectively a housing subsidy when you pair it with the ultra-low real estate prices in these rural areas. The program exists because these counties are losing population. The state is willing to pay people to move there. For a remote worker or young family with student debt, that $15,000 can cover a significant portion of housing costs, especially when homes in these areas are priced 40 to 50% below the national average. The trade-off is isolation. These are rural counties with limited services, fewer job opportunities if you're not working remotely, and a cultural adjustment if you're coming from a coastal city. But for people on fixed Social Security incomes or anyone looking to stretch a limited budget, the net cost of living becomes negligible over the first few years. Loop City, Nebraska made national headlines by offering free residential lots to anyone willing to build a home. The model removes the cost of land, normally 20 to 30% of a home's total value, and leaves you responsible only for construction. Other towns are doing the same thing. Gregory, South Dakota, Corning, Iowa. They're offering cash grants or utility credits on top of the free lots, all designed to lure people back to the rural heartland. This is a direct response to depopulation. These towns are shrinking, losing tax base and community infrastructure. By giving away land, they're betting that new residents will bring economic activity and help sustain local services. The catch is the commitment. You have to build within a specified time frame. You're moving to a small town with limited job opportunities unless you're working remotely, and you're adapting to a lifestyle that's fundamentally different from urban or suburban living. But if you're willing to make that move, the land is free. Guam's housing market splits between the north and the south. In Tamuning and Tumon, you've got executive luxury homes priced up to $1 million. In the southern villages, Umatak, Marizo, Inarajan, a basic 3-bedroom home starts around $190,000, and lots for building are significantly cheaper. Residents in these villages often engage in subsistence lifestyles. They're fishing in the bays and farming small plots, which dramatically reduces the cost of food. That matters in Guam, where the cost of imported goods is one of the highest expenditures. There's also a unique aspect to the rental market. In neighborhoods like Mangilao and Yigo, you'll see for rent signs that aren't listed on the MLS. By dealing directly with owners, often retirees who live off-island, you can negotiate lower rent in exchange for taking on maintenance responsibilities, cleaning air conditioning units, doing yard upkeep. It's sweat equity, and it's a primary driver of affordability for locals and savvy newcomers. The median home price in Inarajan is $209,000. In Tumon, it's $595,000. The difference is real. The Northern Marianas Housing Corporation runs a multi-family subdivision program in places like Mihaville Estates on Saipan, Broadway on Tinian, and Blue Bay Homes on Rhoda. Rent is capped at 30% of a family's adjusted income. But here's the part that sounds impossible. Low-income families are required to pay a minimum rent of only $25 per month. Families with no income can be fully subsidized. These aren't dilapidated units. They include modern amenities, backup generators, and gated security. The NMHC also administers over 360 Section 8 vouchers across the 3 islands, allowing residents to choose privately owned units while the government subsidizes the rent to reasonable market levels. In 2025, total HUD rental assistance in the CNMI reached nearly $7 million, supporting over 500 families. That's a significant public investment designed to keep housing accessible for the indigenous population and low-income residents. The catch is you have to qualify based on income, and the program is limited to CNMI residents. But for those who do qualify, $25 a month is the actual cost. Puerto Rico's Act 60 offers 0% tax on passive income, dividends, interest, capital gains for bona fide residents. If you're a retiree with significant passive income, the tax savings alone can effectively pay for your housing. On the mainland, you might be in the 37% federal tax bracket. In Puerto Rico, you drop to 0 on Puerto Rico source income generated after you move. There's a required annual donation of $10,000 to local nonprofits. But for high net worth retirees, the reduction from 37% to near 0 creates a massive financial surplus. To qualify, you have to be all in. The IRS uses an 11-factor test to determine residency, including physical presence of at least 183 days per year, the location of your personal belongings, and the shifting of social and business ties to the island. You also have to purchase a primary home in Puerto Rico within 2 years of receiving the tax decree. This isn't a model for low-income retirees. It's for people with substantial investment income who can afford to relocate and meet the residency requirements. But for that demographic, the tax arbitrage is significant enough that housing costs become negligible. Morgantown, West Virginia, is offering remote workers $12,000 in cash plus free outdoor recreation passes to relocate. When you combine that with West Virginia's low property taxes and the availability of affordable fixer-upper homes, the net cost of housing for the first few years can become negligible. Other towns in the region, Nitro, Poplar Bluff in Missouri, are highlighted for their ability to stretch every dollar. Housing costs in these areas are 40 to 50% lower than the national average, making them viable options for retirees living on fixed Social Security incomes or remote workers looking to reduce overhead. The trade-off is the same as Kansas or Nebraska. You're moving to a rural or semi-rural area with limited services and a cultural environment that's different from coastal cities. But the financial incentive is real, and for people who can work from anywhere, it's a functional way to eliminate or drastically reduce housing costs. Ridge to Reef Farm in Frederickstead, St. Croix, is a certified organic operation offering educational internships and apprenticeships. Participants live on the farm, receive housing and a portion of the organic produce in exchange for their labor. The farm's goal is to feed 1% of the island's population, addressing critical food security needs while providing a pathway for individuals to live without the burden of rent. The Trust for Virgin Islands Lands works to protect agricultural tracts from luxury development, ensuring that land remains available for small-scale farming and community-based living. By placing land in conservation easements, the Trust lowers the entry cost for new farmers and residents committed to sustainable land stewardship rather than speculative profit. The catch is farm labor in a rural island environment. You're working with your hands, learning organic agriculture, and committing to a sustainability mission. But for people who want to live in the Caribbean without paying Caribbean rent, it's a functional model. The pattern across all 12 of these places is the same. You're not eliminating the cost of living. You're shifting what you're paying with. Sometimes it's labor, sometimes it's isolation, sometimes it's integrating into a community that operates under rules you didn't grow up with. Sometimes it's accepting that the nearest hospital is a 60-mile boat ride, or that your internet comes from a satellite dish, or that you're going to spend your weekends clearing land instead of browsing open houses. But for retirees on fixed income, remote workers who can live anywhere, or anyone just tired of watching half their paycheck disappear into rent, these territories represent something the mainland hasn't offered in decades: a legal framework where housing is treated as something other than a speculative commodity. The information is public, the programs are real. The only question is which trade-off you're willing to make.